March 15th, 2019. The town dentist told Vera Sullivan she should keep her arms covered on her wedding day, that no man would want to see those burn scars walking down the aisle. But when Marcus Brennan, the 6'7" cattle rancher with hands like weathered leather, took her wrists in the middle of that dusty Montana church, he did something no one expected. What made this giant of a man see beauty where everyone else saw only shame? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The bell above Morrison's general store chimed at exactly 6:47 a.m., same as it had every morning for the past 4 years. Vera Sullivan didn't need to look at the clock anymore. Her body knew when old Gerald Morrison would shuffle through that door, smelling of tobacco and yesterday's coffee, looking for his newspaper and a reason to complain about the weather. Morning. Gerald, Vera called from behind the counter, already folding his daily Gazette the way he liked it, sports section on top, obituaries tucked underneath, where he pretended he didn't read them first. Too damn hot for March, as Gerald muttered, which was funny because he'd said it was too damn cold just last week. He dropped 3 quarters on the scarred wooden counter, his eyes doing that thing people's eyes always did, flickering to Vera's forearms, then away, then back again, like they couldn't help themselves. The burns ran from her wrists to her elbows, twisted ridges of pale and pink tissue that looked like melted candle wax in certain lights. Some scars were smooth, others puckered and angry, telling the story of a night 8 years ago that Vera had stopped talking about. She wore long sleeves in winter, which was easy. Spring and summer were harder, but she'd made a promise to herself 3 years back, no more hiding. People were going to stare anyway. Might as well let them get it over with. Have a good day, Gerald. Vera handed him his paper, watching him shuffle out into the Montana morning where the sun was just starting to burn off the frost on Main Street's cracked sidewalks. Crimson Ridge wasn't much of a town, one now 247 people if you counted the Hendersons' new baby. Though Mary Henderson was already talking about moving to Billings, where there were actual opportunities. The general store sat between Ruby's Diner and the post office, forming the holy trinity of buildings that kept Crimson Ridge's heart beating. Everything else, the feed store, the gas station, the Presbyterian church with its leaning steeple, spread out from there like spokes on a wheel. Vera had grown up 3 hours west in Great Falls, back when her arms were smooth and tan from summers at the community pool. Back when her mother was still planning Vera's wedding to Brandon Phillips, the boy who'd promised forever and delivered exactly 4 months before deciding that forever didn't include a girlfriend who looked like she'd crawled out of a fire. Which, technically, she had. The apartment fire had been an electrical thing, faulty wiring in a building that should have been condemned a decade earlier. Vera had been sleeping when the smoke detectors finally screamed, and by the time she'd crawled through the black smoke to the window, the flames had already found her. The firefighter who'd pulled her out said she was lucky. The plastic surgeon who'd done 3 operations said she was a survivor. Brandon Phillips said he just couldn't handle it, couldn't handle people staring, couldn't handle the looks. Vera said that was fine and moved to Crimson Ridge, where nobody knew her story, where she could be the new girl who ran the general store and didn't owe anyone explanations. That had been 4 years ago. She was 31 now, and the whispers had mostly died down. Mostly. There was still Dorothy Chen, who ran the salon and had opinions about everything, who told her own daughter loud enough for Vera to hear, "It's such a shame about that Sullivan girl. Pretty face, but those arms. No man's going to want to wake up to that every morning." Vera had bought her thread from Dorothy the next day without saying a word, because what was there to say? Dorothy wasn't wrong. The 3 men who'd asked Vera out in 4 years had all done the same thing, eyes full of pity, voices too gentle, treating her like she was broken china that might shatter if they touched her wrong. The first one, Daniel Park, had actually winced when she'd rolled up her sleeves at dinner. The second one, Kyle Lawson, had spent the whole evening asking if she was okay about every little thing, until Vera wanted to scream. The third one she'd turned down before he could finish asking. It was easier to be alone. Easier to stock shelves and balance ledgers and listen to Gerald Morrison complain about the weather. Easier to go home to her studio apartment above the store and read mystery novels and not think about the future her mother had planned. The one where she was supposed to be married with kids by now, living in some suburb with a golden retriever and a man who loved her. The morning crowd filtered through, Joyce Hampton buying flour for her famous biscuits, Travis Coleman grabbing energy drinks for his construction crew, the Martinez twins arguing over which candy bars to spend their allowance on. Vera rang them up, made small talk, restocked the coffee filters that always seemed to vanish faster than anything else. At 10:33 a.m., the bell chimed again, and the temperature in the store seemed to drop 5 degrees. Vera looked up from the register and felt her stomach clench. Pauline Brennan stood in the doorway, dressed in her Sunday clothes on a Thursday, her steel-grey hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. Behind her stood her daughter, Rachel, whose smile was pure poison wrapped in pressed cotton. "Vera, dear." Pauline's voice dripped with the kind of sweetness that preceded cruelty. "We need to talk about the church fundraiser." Vera had been on the fundraiser committee for 2 years, mostly because Reverend Walsh had asked personally, and Vera didn't know how to say no to men who reminded her of her father. The spring fundraiser was supposed to be a community barbecue, and Vera had volunteered to handle the supply ordering, buns, condiments, paper plates, the boring logistics nobody else wanted to touch. "What about it?" Vera asked, keeping her voice level. Rachel stepped forward, and Vera noticed she was holding a clipboard like a shield. "We've had some concerns from several committee members." "What concerns?" Pauline placed one manicured hand on the counter, nowhere near Vera's scarred forearms, but the message was clear. "It's about the serving tables, dear. We'll be outside in the heat and people will be eating. We just think it might be more appropriate if you handled the setup and cleanup instead of actually serving food." The implication hung in the air like smoke. Vera felt her face flush, felt the old familiar burn of shame trying to claw its way up her throat. "You think my scars are going to ruin people's appetites?" It wasn't a question. "We didn't say that," Rachel jumped in, but her eyes said everything her mouth wouldn't. "We just want everyone to feel comfortable. It's a family event." Vera's hands curled into fists beneath the counter where they couldn't see. 4 years of keeping her head down, of being polite, of pretending the whispers didn't cut. 4 years of telling herself that Crimson Ridge was home, that these people had accepted her. "I'll think about it," Vera said, which was code for "get out of my store." Pauline smiled like she'd won something. "That's all we ask, dear. We'll see you at the meeting on Sunday." She turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Vera, you might want to wear something with longer sleeves to church. The air conditioning has been broken, and you know how the sun comes through those windows. Wouldn't want you to get uncomfortable." They left in a cloud of expensive perfume and casual cruelty, and Vera stood behind the counter feeling like she was 19 again, watching Brandon Phillips walk away because loving her had become too hard. She closed the store for lunch at noon, flipping the sign and retreating upstairs to her apartment where the walls were covered in bookshelves and no one could see her cry. Except she didn't cry. She was too tired for cry, too worn down by the constant small cuts that people like Pauline and Rachel delivered with smiles. Vera made a sandwich she didn't eat and stood by the window overlooking Main Street, watching Crimson Ridge go about its business. She thought about leaving, about packing up and trying somewhere new where nobody knew her. But she'd already run once, and running again felt like admitting that Dorothy Chen and Pauline Brennan were right, that she was too damaged for this world, that her scars had made her less than whole. The knock on her apartment door came at 12:47 p.m. Unexpected and loud. Vera wiped her eyes, checked her reflection in the hallway mirror, and opened the door to find Marcus Brennan standing in her narrow stairwell, holding his hat in his hands like a man at a funeral. She'd seen Marcus around town, of course. Everyone had. He was impossible to miss. 6 feet 7 inches of weathered muscle and sun-damaged skin, with hands that looked like they could strangle a bull or cradle a kitten with equal ease. He ran the Broken Creek Ranch, 15 miles outside town, 3,000 acres of cattle and horses, and hard work. He came into the store once a month for supplies, said "ma'am," like he meant it, and left without making small talk. Vera had never heard him say more than 10 words at a time. She'd certainly never had him standing at her door, looking uncomfortable in a clean shirt and jeans that had been pressed with actual creases down the front. "Mr. Brennan." Vera gripped the doorframe, suddenly aware that she was wearing her rattiest sweatpants and an old college t-shirt with a coffee stain on the collar. "Did you need something from the store?" "I'm closed for lunch, but I heard what my mother said to you." Marcus's voice was like gravel sliding down a mountain, rough and low. "Down in the store. I was picking up feed at Coleman's next door, and I heard through the wall." Vera felt her face burn. "Oh, I came to apologize." He met her eyes, and Vera realized his was an unexpected shade of gray-blue, like storm clouds over the mountains. "My mother's got no right to talk to you like that." "No right at all." "She's your mother," Vera said carefully, "because in towns like Crimson Ridge, family loyalty was currency. She's wrong." Marcus turned his hat in his hands, and Vera saw his knuckles were scarred too. A roadmap of work and accidents, and a life spent wrestling with things that fought back. "And I wanted you to know that not everyone thinks. I mean, what I'm trying to say is—" He stopped, frustrated with his own tongue. "You don't have to apologize for her," Vera said softly. "It's not your fault. Maybe not. But I'm still sorry." He put his hat back on, and Vera thought he was going to leave. But he paused, one boot already on the top step. "You planning to keep serving at that fundraiser?" Vera hadn't planned anything yet, but something in Marcus's tone made her lift her chin. "Yes," Marcus nodded once, like she'd given the right answer. "Good. Town needs more people who don't back down." Then he was gone, his boots heavy on the wooden stairs. Leaving, Vera standing in her doorway, wondering what the hell just happened. She went back to the window and watched him climb into a dust-covered pickup truck that looked older than Vera. He didn't look up at her window, didn't wave, just pulled out onto Main Street and headed north toward Broken Creek Ranch, where Vera imagined he had 1,000 things more important than defending the honor of a scarred woman he barely knew. But he'd come anyway, had climbed her stairs and stumbled over an apology that wasn't his to give, had called his own mother wrong in front of a stranger. Vera thought about that for the rest of her lunch break, thought about it while she reopened the store and served the afternoon customers, thought about it that evening while she balanced the day's receipts and locked up for the night. She thought about Marcus Brennan's storm cloud eyes and scarred knuckles, and for the first time in 4 years, wondered if maybe Crimson Ridge had one person who saw her as something other than the woman with the ruined arms. It was a small thought, barely a whisper, but it was enough to make Vera smile as she climbed the stairs to her apartment, enough to make her think that maybe, just maybe, she wouldn't spend the rest of her life alone behind a counter, measuring her worth by how well she could pretend the stairs didn't hurt. Outside her window, the Montana night settled over Crimson Ridge like a blanket, stars emerging one by one in the endless sky. Somewhere out there, past the sleeping houses and empty streets, Marcus Brennan was probably tending to evening chores, feeding horses or checking cattle or doing whatever it was that ranchers did when the sun went down. Vera wondered if he was thinking about her too. Then she told herself she was being ridiculous and went to bed, where she dreamed of fires and flowers and a man tall enough to block out the sun. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The Presbyterian Church on Willow Street had stood for 93 years, outlasting 2 fires, a tornado, and 4 different ministers, who'd all eventually fled to bigger congregations with better pay. Its white paint was peeling, the steeple leaned 3 degrees to the east, and the air conditioning had been broken since last August. But every Sunday, the pews filled with the same families who'd been filling them for generations, singing the same hymns and pretending they couldn't hear Mrs. Patterson snoring during the sermon. Vera arrived at 9:52 a.m., 8 minutes before the fundraiser committee meeting was set to start in the basement fellowship hall. She'd chosen a navy blue cotton dress with three-quarter sleeves, a compromise that covered most of her scars but wouldn't make her look like she was hiding. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she'd skipped makeup except for a touch of mascara. The basement smelled like old coffee and the lavender sachets that someone had scattered around in a losing battle against mildew. 6 folding chairs were arranged in a circle, and Pauline Brennan had already claimed the one closest to the coffee pot, her posture radiating ownership. Rachel sat beside her, scrolling through her phone with the concentrated focus of someone deliberately ignoring the world. Reverend Walsh stood by the ancient percolator, looking exhausted in the way that small-town ministers always did, caught between the spiritual needs of his congregation and the petty politics that consumed them. He was 56, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and a growing bald spot he tried to cover with strategic combing. "Vera, good morning," he smiled with genuine warmth, and Vera remembered why she'd agreed to join this committee in the first place. "Coffee, please." Vera took the chipped mug he offered, noting that Pauline's lips had thinned into a disapproving line. Apparently showing up was an act of defiance. The other committee members trickled in. Stuart Hammond, who owned the hardware store and treated every meeting like a corporate board session. His wife, Linda, who seemed to apologize for Stuart's existence with her eyes. And Beth Carson, the elementary school teacher who'd been on every volunteer committee in Crimson Ridge for the past 20 years and looked like she regretted all of them. They settled into their chairs, and Reverend Walsh opened with a prayer that asked for guidance and unity, which everyone knew was code for, "Please don't let these people kill each other in my church basement." All right. Stuart pulled out a typed agenda, because of course he had a typed agenda. First order of business, food service logistics for the barbecue. "Pauline, you had some concerns." Pauline set down her coffee with precise gentleness, the way a chess player places a piece before checkmate. "I've been thinking about the optics of our event. We're trying to raise money for the youth group's mission trip, which means we need to present ourselves in the best possible light. First impressions matter. What kind of optics are we talking about?" Beth asked, genuine confusion in her voice. Rachel looked up from her phone. "We just think the people serving food should look professional, put it together, approachable." The implication hung in the air like humidity. Vera felt every eye in the room flicker toward her arms, then away. "Vera's been handling supply coordination beautifully," Reverend Walsh said carefully. "I'm not sure what the issue is." "There's no issue," Pauline said, her smile never reaching her eyes. "We simply think that Vera would be better suited to managing the setup and breakdown, behind-the-scenes work. She's so organized, after all." Linda Hammond shifted uncomfortably. Stuart studied his agenda like it contained the secrets of the universe. Beth Carson opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Vera set down her coffee cup. Her hands were steady, which surprised her. "You want me off the serving line because of my scars?" "We never said that," Rachel started. But Pauline cut her off with a raised hand. "Let's not be dramatic. Vera, this is about what's best for the fundraiser. Some people might find visible scarring distracting, especially when they're trying to eat." "It's nothing personal." "It's entirely personal," Vera said quietly. "You're telling me my arms are too ugly for public view?" The words landed like grenades. Linda gasped. Stuart's face turned red. Beth Carson looked like she wanted to crawl under her chair. Reverend Walsh stood up. "Now, Pauline, I don't think—" The basement door opened with a bang that made everyone jump. Marcus Brennan had to duck to clear the doorframe, his broad shoulders nearly touching both sides as he descended the stairs. He was wearing what Vera was starting to recognize as his town clothes: clean jeans, a pressed shirt with pearl snaps, boots that had been recently polished. His hat was in his hands again, and his expression could have frozen lava. "Marcus." Pauline's voice went up an octave, surprise cracking through her carefully maintained composure. "What are you doing here? This is a committee meeting." "I'm joining the committee." Marcus's voice filled the small space like thunder. "Reverend Walsh, you said last month you needed more volunteers." "I'm volunteering." Reverend Walsh looked like Christmas had come early. "That's wonderful, Marcus. Please have a seat." There weren't enough chairs. Marcus dragged a folding chair from the stack against the wall, the metal scraping against concrete, and positioned it directly between Vera and Pauline. When he sat down, his massive frame made the circle suddenly lopsided, the balance of power shifting like a table with one leg cut short. "What did I miss?" Marcus asked, looking at his mother with an expression that could have stripped paint. "We were just discussing service assignments," Stuart said weakly. Clearly wishing he was anywhere else, I heard. Marcus leaned back in his chair, which creaked ominously under his weight. "Sounded like you were telling Vera she's not good enough to hand out hamburgers." "That is not what we said," Rachel snapped, color rising in her cheeks. "Then what did you say?" The silence stretched like taffy. Pauline's jaw clenched so hard, Vera could see the muscles jumping. Rachel looked at her mother, then at Marcus, then at her phone, like it might offer an escape route. Beth Carson cleared her throat. "For what it's worth, I think Vera should serve if she wants to serve. She's been doing a great job with everything else." "Thank you, Beth," Reverend Walsh said quickly, seizing the lifeline. "Unless there are any other concerns, legitimate concerns about Vera's ability to do the job, I think we should keep the assignments as planned." "I have a concern," Marcus said, and everyone turned to look at him. "My concern is that we're sitting in a church basement talking about hiding people because they don't meet someone's definition of presentable. That seem like Christian behavior to anyone else here?" Vera stared at him. She'd never heard Marcus say more than a sentence at a time, and now he was giving speeches in her defense, calling out his own mother in front of half the congregation's leadership. His ears were red, she noticed. Despite the confident words, he was clearly uncomfortable being the center of attention. "Marcus, this is inappropriate," Pauline hissed. "This is not your concern. You're my mother and you're being cruel. That makes it my concern." He turned to Vera, and his storm cloud eyes were steady. "You want to serve food at this fundraiser?" "Yes," Vera said, her voice stronger than she felt. Then that settled. Marcus looked around the circle, daring anyone to contradict him. "What's next on the agenda?" Stuart Hammond, bless him, took the cue and started talking about parking logistics with the desperate energy of a man trying to steer away from an iceberg. The meeting continued for another 40 minutes, covering permit requirements and equipment rentals and whether they should have a vegetarian option. Pauline contributed nothing, sitting rigid as a statue, her fury radiating like heat from a furnace. Rachel had disappeared entirely into her phone. When Reverend Walsh finally called the meeting to a close, everyone scattered like birds from a shotgun blast. Pauline and Rachel were the first out the door, not speaking to anyone, especially not to Marcus. Beth Carson squeezed Vera's hand on her way out. Linda Hammond whispered, "Good for you," before Stuart dragged her away. Vera stood up, her legs shaky with adrenaline, and found Marcus waiting by the stairs. "That was—" she started, then realized she had no idea how to finish the sentence. "Overdue," Marcus said flatly. "My mother's been running roughshod over this town for too long. Someone needed to tell her, no, you didn't have to do that. You're going to catch hell at home." Marcus shrugged, a movement that involved his entire upper body. "I don't live at home. Haven't for 15 years. And my mother doesn't get to decide who's worthy of basic human decency." Vera felt something crack open in her chest. Some barrier she'd built up after 4 years of small cruelties and careful isolation. "Thank you," she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. "Don't thank me for doing the bare minimum." Marcus looked uncomfortable again, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "You hungry?" "Ruby's is open." "I'm buying." The invitation caught Vera completely off guard. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to." "I'm asking if you want to." He met her eyes, and Vera saw something there she hadn't expected. Uncertainty. Like he was bracing for rejection, like he thought she might say no. Okay, Vera heard herself say. Yes, I'd like that. They walked to Ruby's diner in silence, side by side on the cracked sidewalk, the Sunday morning sun turning everything golden. People stared, of course they stared. Marcus Brennan was walking down Main Street with the Sullivan woman, and that was going to be the talk of the town by noon. Vera could practically hear the phone lines buzzing, spreading the news like wildfire through Crimson Ridge's gossip network. She didn't care. For the first time in 4 years, she didn't care who was watching or what they thought. Ruby's diner occupied a converted Airstream trailer that had been permanently welded to a concrete foundation sometime in the 1960s. It had red vinyl booths that were patched with duct tape, a jukebox that only played country music from the 80s, and a menu that hadn't changed since Vera moved to town. Ruby Martinez, no relation to the candy-stealing twins, ran the place with an iron fist and a soft heart, feeding half the town and extending credit to the other half. The bell jingled as they entered, and every head in the diner swiveled toward them. Vera counted 8 people in the booths, all of whom she knew by name, all of whom were now going to have front-row seats to whatever this was. Marcus Brennan. "As I live and breathe," Ruby called from behind the counter, her weathered face breaking into a grin. "You haven't graced my establishment in 3 months. I was starting to think you'd learned to cook." "Never gonna happen, Ruby." Marcus gestured to a booth in the back, letting Vera slide in first before folding himself into the opposite seat. His knees hit the underside of the table, and he had to angle them sideways to fit. Ruby brought over 2 menus and 2 waters without being asked. "Sunday specials, chicken fried steak, coffee?" "Please," Vera said. "Make it 2, Marcus added. Ruby's eyes flickered between them, sharp and assessing, but she didn't comment. Just headed back to the counter to grab the coffee pot, leaving them in the bubble of semi-privacy that the back booth provided. Vera studied her menu, even though she'd memorized it years ago. Across from her, Marcus did the same, and she realized they were both hiding behind laminated rectangles because neither of them knew what to say now that they were here, now that the heat of the moment had passed and they were just 2 people sitting in a diner on a Sunday morning. "Your mother's going to be furious," Vera said finally, setting down her menu. "My mother's been furious since 1987, Marcus replied. "I've learned to live with it. What happened in 1987? I was born." He said it deadpan, but there was something in his eyes that might have been humor. "Only child, and I came out too big and too stubborn and too much like my father for her taste." "Where is your father?" "Died when I was 16. Heart attack in the South pasture. I found him 3 hours later." Marcus's voice was matter-of-fact, but his hands had tightened around his water glass. "Mum wanted to sell the ranch, move to Billings, start over somewhere civilized. I wouldn't let her. So she got to stay in Crimson Ridge, but never forgave me for making her." Ruby returned with coffee, took their orders, chicken fried steak for Marcus, a club sandwich for Vera, and vanished again. The diner had gone back to its usual noise level, but Vera could feel eyes on them, could practically hear the mental notes being taken. "Why did you came to the meeting?" Vera asked, wrapping her hands around the warm coffee mug. "To spite your mother?" "I came because what she said to you on Thursday was wrong. What she tried to do today was worse." Marcus added 3 sugars to his coffee and stirred it with a spoon that looked tiny in his massive hand. "I'm not good with words." "Never have been. But I know cruelty when I hear it, and I'm tired of pretending I don't. Most people do." "Pretend, I mean." Vera stared into her coffee, seeing her reflection ripple on the dark surface. "Easier to look away than get involved." Easier doesn't mean right. They fell silent again, but it was a different kind of silence now. Comfortable almost. The kind of silence that exists between people who understand something fundamental about each other without needing to explain it. Their food arrived, and they ate like people who were used to eating alone, efficiently, without conversation, focused on the task. But every now and then, Vera would look up and find Marcus watching her, and every now and then he'd catch her watching him, and neither of them looked away as quickly as they should have. When the check came, Marcus paid before Vera could reach for her purse. "I said I was buying. Next time's on me," Vera said, then froze, realizing she'd implied there would be a next time, that she wanted there to be a next time. Marcus's lips quirked into what might have been a smile. "Deal." They walked back toward Main Street, where Marcus's truck was parked outside the church and Vera's apartment waited above the general store. The sun had climbed higher, burning off the last of the morning cool, turning the day bright and endless. "Vera," Marcus stopped on the corner, hat in hands again. "I want you to know something. Those scars on your arms, they don't make you less. They don't make you ugly. They make you someone who survived something terrible and kept going." "That's not nothing." Vera felt tears prick her eyes and blinked them back furiously. "You barely know me." "I know enough." He put his hat back on, tipped it slightly in her direction. "I'll see you around." Then he was gone, climbing into his ancient pickup and pulling away, leaving Vera standing on the corner of Main and Willow with her heart doing strange things in her chest and her mind, replaying his words like a song she couldn't get out of her head. Those scars don't make you less. Nobody had ever said that to her. Not the doctors, not her mother, certainly not Brandon Phillips. They'd all treated her scars like a tragedy that needed to be overcome, a flaw that needed to be minimized, a problem that needed solving. Marcus Brennan had looked at them and seen strength. Vera walked back to her apartment feeling like the world had tilted slightly on its axis, like the rules she'd been living by for 4 years had suddenly been rewritten in a language she was just beginning to understand. She spent the rest of Sunday reading on her couch, drinking tea and thinking about storm cloud eyes and the weight of a voice that said, "You're enough," without using those exact words. Outside her window, Crimson Ridge carried on with its usual Sunday rhythms, families leaving church, kids riding bikes, the distant sound of someone mowing their lawn. But something had changed, some fundamental shift that Vera couldn't quite name. For the first time since moving to this town, she felt like she might belong here. Not because everyone accepted her, but because one person had stood up and said that their rejection was wrong. One person who was 6'7", inches of quiet strength and unexpected kindness. One person who saw her scars and didn't look away. Monday morning brought rain to Crimson Ridge. The kind of persistent drizzle that turned the dirt roads to mud and made everyone in town move a little slower, a little more carefully. Vera opened the general store at 6:30 a.m. to find Gerald Morrison already waiting under the awning, newspaper tucked under his arm to keep it dry. "Morning, Gerald." "Too damn wet for March," he muttered, which was at least a change from too hot or too cold. He paid for his paper and left, and Vera settled into the familiar rhythm of Monday. Inventory checks, restocking shelves, the quiet hum of the ancient refrigeration units keeping the dairy section cold. The phone rang at 8:15 a.m. Vera answered to find Beth Carson on the other end, speaking in the hushed tones of someone sharing classified information. "Vera, you won't believe what happened at the Peterson house last night." The Petersons lived 2 doors down from the Brennans, and in a town like Crimson Ridge that was close enough to hear raised voices through open windows. Beth proceeded to describe in breathless detail how Pauline had apparently spent Sunday evening delivering a lecture to Marcus that could be heard clear across the street. Something about family loyalty and public embarrassment, and how dare he humiliate her in front of the committee. And then Marcus just walked out, Beth concluded with evident satisfaction. Got in his truck and drove away. Didn't come back until after midnight. Janet Peterson saw his headlights. "Beth, I don't need to know this," Vera said, but it was a weak protest. She did want to know. Wanted to know that Marcus had paid a price for defending her. Wanted to know if he regretted it. Wanted to know if he was okay. "Well, I figured you should hear it from me instead of Dorothy Chen. You know how she exaggerates." Beth paused. "You doing all right?" "Yesterday was intense. I'm fine. Better than fine, actually. Good, you deserve to be." Beth lowered her voice even more. "And between you and me, it's about time someone stood up to Pauline Brennan. That woman's been running this town like her personal fiefdom for too long. After Beth hung up, Vera tried to focus on work, but her mind kept drifting to Marcus. She wondered what he'd said to his mother after he left. Wondered if he'd meant what he said at Ruby's about her scars, representing strength. Wondered if she'd imagined the way he'd looked at her across the booth, like she was worth looking at. The rain picked up around noon, turning from drizzle to downpour. Vera was restocking the canned goods aisle when the bell above the door chimed, bringing with it a gust of wind and water. Marcus Brennan stood dripping in her doorway, his hat streaming water, his jacket soaked through. He looked like he'd been wrestling with the weather and lost. "Mr. Brennan," Vera set down the can of green beans she'd been holding. "You're drenched." Truck broke down half a mile out. He closed the door behind him, careful not to drip on the merchandise. "Mind if I use your phone?" "Cell service is out in this weather." "Of course. There's one behind the counter." Vera grabbed a clean towel from the shelf and handed it to him. "And there's coffee if you want it." Marcus took the towel with a nod of thanks and moved behind the counter, water squelching in his boots. He picked up the ancient landline and dialed a number from memory, then waited, the phone pressed to his ear while he watched the rain sheet down the store's front windows. "Ray, it's Marcus. Yeah, the Chevy. She died on Highway 12, right past the Morrison turnoff. Fuel pump, I think. No, I'll walk back after this. Let's up. Tomorrow's fine. Thanks." He hung up and stood there for a moment, looking like a man who'd run out of tasks to occupy himself with. "Coffee?" Vera asked again, already reaching for a cup. "Appreciate it." She poured him a cup from the pot she kept going all day, added the 3 sugars she'd noticed he used at Ruby's, and handed it to him. Marcus's eyebrows raised slightly when he tasted it and found it already sweetened the way he liked it. "You were paying attention," he said. "I pay attention to a lot of things." Vera felt her cheeks warm. Occupational hazard of running a store. You learn how people take their coffee, what newspaper they read, which candy bars they steal when they think you're not looking. Who's stealing candy bars? The Martinez twins, every Thursday. I add it to their mother's tab at the end of the month. Marcus's lips twitched into something that might have been amusement. He leaned against the counter, cradling the coffee cup in his massive hands, and for the first time since Sunday, Vera saw him up close, without the urgency of confrontation between them. The rain created a cocoon of sound around the store, muffling the outside world, making the space feel smaller and more intimate. "I heard you had a rough night," Vera said quietly. "Beth Carson called." "Course she did." Marcus sighed, a sound like wind through canyon walls. "Mom's not speaking to me. Rachel sent me about 15 text messages I haven't read. Pretty standard Brennan family drama. I'm sorry I caused that. You didn't cause anything. My mother's pride caused it." He took another sip of coffee. "She called me ungrateful. Said I was throwing away family for a stranger who means nothing to me." The words hung between them. Vera found herself holding her breath, waiting for whatever came next. "I told her she was wrong about the stranger part." Marcus continued, his grey-blue eyes steady on Vera's. "Told her you're not nothing. Told her I plan to keep showing up at those committee meetings, and if she doesn't like it, she can quit." "What did she say to that?" "She threw a plate at me. Hit the wall behind my head. Good aim for someone who's 73. Vera's hand flew to her mouth, caught between horror and the sudden inappropriate urge to laugh. "Oh my God, it was an old plate. Nothing valuable." Marcus shrugged, like having dishes thrown at him was a normal Tuesday. "She'll come around eventually. Or she won't. Either way, I'm done pretending her behavior is acceptable just because she's family." The bell chimed again, and Travis Coleman burst through the door with his construction crew, all of them wet and talking too loud about the storm and how the job site had turned into a lake. Vera moved to help them, ringing up energy drinks and beef jerky and bags of chips while they tracked mud across her clean floors and complained about the weather. Marcus stayed behind the counter, out of the way, watching the chaos with an expression Vera couldn't quite read. When the crew finally left, he helped her mop up the muddy footprints without being asked, working in comfortable silence while the rain continued its assault on the roof. "You don't have to do that," Vera said. I know. Marcus wrung out the mop in the bucket. But I got nothing else to do until this storm passes. And you're doing me a favor by letting me wait here instead of walking back in that mess. They finished the mopping together, and then Marcus helped her unload the delivery that had arrived before the rain started. 50-pound bags of dog food that he hoisted like they weighed nothing. Cases of motor oil that he stacked with precision in the storage room. Vera found herself watching the way he moved, economical and sure, a man who'd spent his life working with his body and knew exactly what it was capable of. "You hungry?" she asked when they'd finished. "I was about to make lunch. Nothing fancy, just sandwiches. I don't want to impose." "You're not imposing. I'm offering." Vera wiped her hands on her apron. "Come on, there's a break room in the back. It's not much, but it's dry." The break room was barely bigger than a closet, a folding table, 2 chairs, a mini-fridge, and a microwave that had been old when Reagan was president. But it was warm and quiet, and when Vera pulled out bread and cold cuts and started assembling sandwiches, Marcus watched her like he was memorizing the process. "You do this every day?" he asked. "Make lunch for yourself back here?" "Usually. Sometimes I close up and go to Ruby's, but most days it's easier to just eat here." She handed him a plate, turkey and Swiss on wheat with mustard and lettuce. The same thing he'd ordered at the diner, that time she'd seen him there 6 months ago. Another detail she'd noticed and filed away without meaning to. Marcus looked at the sandwich, then at her. "You remember how I order my sandwiches?" Like I said. Occupational hazard. They ate, and conversation came easier now, less weighted with the tension of Sunday's confrontations. Marcus told her about the ranch, 3,000 acres that had been in his family for 4 generations, 200 head of cattle, a breeding program for quarter horses that was starting to make a name for itself in Montana. He talked about the land like it was alive, like it had a personality and moods and demands that had to be respected. Vera told him about growing up in Great Falls, about her father, who'd been a high school history teacher, and her mother who'd worked at the library, about college in Missoula, where she'd studied business administration because it seemed practical, about the apartment fire that had changed everything, about the 3 surgeries that had saved her arms, but couldn't save her from the way people looked at her afterward. "The worst part wasn't the pain," Vera said, surprising herself with the admission. She never talked about this, never let anyone close enough to hear it. "The worst part was watching people decide I was damaged goods. Like my worth had literally burned away with my skin." Marcus set down his sandwich, his expression dark. "That's on them, not you." "I know that now. Took me a while to figure it out, though." Vera stared at her scarred forearms, the twisted tissue that she'd spent years trying to hide. "I used to think if I just covered them up enough, if I just stayed quiet and didn't make waves, people would forget. But you can't make people forget something they're determined to see, so you stopped hiding. I stopped hiding from everyone except myself." Vera looked up, meeting his eyes. "But Sunday, when you said those scars made me someone who survived and kept going. That was the first time anyone made me feel like they might be something other than a tragedy." Marcus leaned forward, his elbows on the small table, his size making the break room feel even smaller. "They are something other than a tragedy. They're proof you're stronger than whatever tried to break you. That's worth something. That's worth a lot." Vera felt something shift in her chest, some locked door opening just a crack. "Why do you care? We barely know each other. Maybe I'm tired of watching good people get treated like they're less than because they don't fit. Someone's narrow definition of acceptable." Marcus ran a hand through his still damp hair. "Maybe I see something in you that reminds me of my father, someone who keeps showing up even when the world makes it hard. Maybe I'm just selfish and like the way you make your coffee. All of those reasons." "Yeah, all of them." He stood up, his head nearly brushing the low ceiling. "Rain's letting up. I should head back to the truck, see if I can figure out what's wrong before Ray gets there tomorrow." They walked back through the store together, and Vera found herself not wanting him to leave. which was ridiculous because they'd only spent a few hours together and most of that had been working or eating or cleaning up mud. But something about Marcus Brennan's presence made her feel steadier, like the ground beneath her feet was more solid than it had been in years. At the door, Marcus paused, his hand on the handle. "The fundraiser's on Saturday. You still planning to serve?" "Yes, good." He pulled on his damp jacket.
"I'll be there too."
"On the serving line, if they'll have me. Figure you could use backup in case my mother decides to stage a protest." Vera laughed, the sound surprising her. "You don't have to do that." "I want to." He opened the door, and the smell of rain and wet earth flooded in. "Besides, someone's got to make sure you're not carrying all the heavy stuff by yourself. You're strong, Vera Sullivan, but you're also about a foot shorter than me." He tipped his hat and stepped out into the grey afternoon, leaving Vera standing in the doorway watching him walk away through the puddles. The rain had stopped, leaving everything clean and glistening. The world washed new. Vera touched her forearms, tracing the ridges of scar tissue that used to make her feel like she needed to apologize for existing. They felt different now. Not healed, they'd never fully healed, but transformed. Rewritten by Marcus Brennan's words into something that might be beautiful in its own strange way. She went back inside and finished her workday, serving customers and balancing accounts and sweeping floors. But her mind kept returning to the break room, to the way Marcus had looked at her scars without flinching, without pity, without anything except acceptance. That evening, after she'd closed up and climbed the stairs to her apartment, Vera stood at her window and looked out at Crimson Ridge, settling into twilight. Somewhere out there, Marcus was probably fixing his truck or tending to horses or doing whatever ranchers did when the rain finally stopped. She wondered if he was thinking about her the way she was thinking about him, with a mix of curiosity and hope and something that felt dangerously close to possibility. Her phone buzzed with a text from Beth Carson. "The whole town's talking about Marcus spending 3 hours at your store today. Just FYI. Also good for you." Vera smiled and put her phone away without responding. Let them talk. Let Pauline Brennan rage, and Rachel send angry texts, and Dorothy Chen spread rumors in her salon. For the first time in 4 years, Vera didn't care what the whole town thought. She cared what one person thought. And he'd already told her, in a break room barely bigger than a closet, that her scars made her strong. That was enough. That was more than enough. It was everything. Tuesday morning arrived with crystalline skies, the kind of painfully blue clarity that only comes after a good rain has scrubbed the atmosphere clean. Vera opened the store to find a pickup truck already parked outside. Not Marcus's ancient Chevy, but a newer Ford with Broken Creek Ranch painted on the door in faded letters. Marcus climbed out carrying a cardboard box, and Vera's heart did something complicated in her chest before she could tell it to behave. "Morning," he called, waiting while she unlocked the door. "Brought you something." Inside the box were 24 fresh eggs, their shells still speckled with bits of straw, and a mason jar of honey so golden it looked like captured sunlight. "From the ranch," Marcus explained, setting the box on the counter. "Chickens are overproducing, and the bees have been busy. Figured you could use them." Vera touched the jar of honey, feeling its weight, its warmth, from sitting in the truck. "You didn't have to do this." "I know I didn't have to. I wanted to." He shifted his weight, and Vera realized he was nervous. Marcus Brennan, who'd faced down his mother in a church basement and walked through a rainstorm like it was nothing, was nervous about giving her eggs and honey. "Also wanted to ask if you'd like to come out to the ranch sometime. See where all this comes from." The invitation hung between them, loaded with implications neither of them was quite ready to name. "I'd like that," Vera said carefully. "When? Friday? The store closes at 6, right? I could pick you up at 6:30, bring you out for dinner. Nothing fancy, just what I cook for myself. But the sun sets real pretty from the porch this time of year. Friday works." Vera felt herself smiling, something warm unfurling in her stomach. "Should I bring anything?" "Just yourself." Marcus backed toward the door, like he was afraid he might say something else, something that would tip the careful balance they were maintaining. I'll see you then. And at the fundraiser on Saturday, he left before she could respond, and Vera stood behind her counter, holding a jar of honey and feeling like her life had just tilted into unfamiliar territory. A territory that involved sunset dinners and ranch visits, and a man who looked at her like she was worth the drive into town. The week unfolded with agonizing slowness. Wednesday brought a steady stream of customers who all seemed to have heard about Marcus's visit, about the eggs and honey, about Friday's dinner invitation, because somehow Beth Carson had already found out and told half the town. Dorothy Chen came in for a thread and spent 20 minutes offering unsolicited advice about not getting your hopes up and men who feel sorry for you. Vera rang up her purchase with a smile that didn't reach her eyes and said nothing. Because what was there to say? That Marcus didn't pity her? That he'd called her strong? That when he looked at her she felt seen in a way she hadn't felt since before the fire? Dorothy wouldn't understand. Most people wouldn't understand. They'd spent 4 years deciding who Vera Sullivan was, and they weren't interested in evidence to the contrary. Thursday afternoon, Rachel Brennan appeared in the store like a storm cloud in designer jeans. She picked up a shopping basket and began filling it with random items. Cereal she probably didn't eat. Magazines she likely wouldn't read, all, while working her way toward the counter where Vera was processing an order for the elementary school. A cafeteria, Vera. Rachel set her basket down with deliberate gentleness. Can we talk? We're talking now. Vera didn't look up from her paperwork. About my brother. About what you're doing. Now Vera did look up, meeting Rachel's eyes directly. I'm not doing anything to your brother, Rachel. We're adults having a conversation. That's all? That's not all, though, is it? Rachel leaned against the counter, and Vera caught the scent of expensive perfume. Marcus is... He's not good with people. He doesn't understand social dynamics. And I think you're taking advantage of his kindness. The accusation landed like a slap. Vera set down her pen with careful precision. Taking advantage, how exactly? He feels sorry for you. He's always had this thing about defending underdogs, ever since we were kids. And you're playing into that, letting him think he's rescuing you or whatever fantasy he's constructed. Rachel's voice dropped to something that might have been concerning if it wasn't wrapped in condescension. When he realizes you're just another charity case, it's going to hurt him. And I don't want to see my brother hurt. Vera counted to 10 in her head, then to 20. Does Marcus seem hurt to you? Because from where I'm standing, he seems like he's making his own choices. And if you have concerns about those choices, maybe you should talk to him instead of ambushing me in my store. I tried talking to him. He won't listen. He never listens when he's decided to be noble about something. Rachel picked up her basket. Just don't break his heart, okay? He's a good man, even if he doesn't see what everyone else sees. And what does everyone else see? Vera asked, though she already knew the answer. Rachel's expression softened into something that might have been genuine sympathy. That you're not right for him. That this is going to end badly. That he deserves someone who doesn't come with complications. She paid for her random purchases and left, and Vera stood behind the counter feeling like she'd been hollowed out and filled with doubt. Was Rachel right? Was Marcus just acting out some savior complex, attracted to Vera's brokenness rather than to Vera herself? Would he wake up one morning and realize that defending her in committee meetings was different from actually wanting to build something with her? The questions circled in her head like vultures for the rest of the afternoon. By the time she closed the store at 6, Vera had nearly convinced herself to cancel Friday's dinner, to tell Marcus that this was moving too fast, that they should slow down before someone got hurt. But then she climbed the stairs to her apartment and found a note taped to her door, written in blocky handwriting on a piece of paper torn from a feed store receipt. Vera had to run cattle up to the north pasture, won't make it back to town until late. Been thinking about what I said Sunday, about your scars. Want you to know I meant every word. See you Friday. Marcus. Vera held the note, reading it 3 times, 4 times, until the words were burned into her memory. He'd driven into town just to leave this, just to make sure she knew he wasn't having second thoughts. That was the opposite of pity. That was the intention. That was choice. She tucked the note into her pocket and decided that Rachel Brennan didn't know her brother as well as she thought she did. Friday arrived wrapped in anticipation. Vera closed the store at exactly 6 o'clock, ran upstairs to shower and change, and stood in front of her tiny closet for 15 minutes, trying to decide what you wore to dinner at a ranch with a man who made your heart race. She settled on jeans and a simple blue blouse with short sleeves because she was done hiding her arms, done pretending they were something to be ashamed of. Marcus arrived at 6:30 on the dot, freshly showered himself, wearing clean jeans and a dark green flannel that brought out the grey-blue of his eyes. He held the truck door open for her, and Vera climbed into the cab that smelled like leather and hay and something else, something that was just Marcus. The drive to Broken Creek Ranch took 20 minutes, heading north out of Crimson Ridge on Highway 12 before turning onto a dirt road marked by a weathered wooden arch with the ranch name burned into it. The road wound through open grassland dotted with cattle, past a stock pond reflecting the evening sky, until it dead-ended at a cluster of buildings that looked like they'd grown organically from the landscape. The main house was a sprawling single-story structure with a wraparound porch and a metal roof that had been patched in several places. The barn loomed behind it, massive and red with white trim, and beyond that Vera could see paddocks and outbuildings and the organized chaos of a working ranch. "It's not much to look at," Marcus said, cutting the engine. "But it's home. It's beautiful," Vera said, and meant it. There was something honest about the place, something that matched Marcus himself, practical, weathered, built to last. He led her inside through a mudroom cluttered with boots and coats and equipment, into a kitchen that was clearly the heart of the house. The cabinets were oak, worn smooth by decades of use. The stove was ancient but spotless. A wooden table that could seat 10 dominated the center of the room, scarred with use but solid as bedrock. "Have a seat." Marcus gestured to the table while he moved to the stove where something was already simmering in a cast-iron pot. "Hope you like beef stew. It's about all I know how to make that fit for the company." Vera sat, watching him work. He moved around the kitchen with the same economy of motion he brought to everything else, pulling down bowls, cutting thick slices of homemade bread, pouring water into mason jars because apparently he didn't own proper glasses. The domesticity of it all felt surreal. Marcus Brennan, who'd stood up to his mother for a woman he barely knew, who'd walked through a rainstorm to use her phone, who'd left notes on her door, now serving her beef stew in his kitchen like it was the most natural thing in the world. The stew was rich and hearty, loaded with tender chunks of beef and vegetables that had clearly come from someone's garden. They ate in comfortable silence, and Vera realized this was becoming their pattern. Work first, conversation second, comfort always. "This is delicious," Vera said, mopping up gravy with her bread. "Where'd you learn to cook?" "Trial and error, mostly. My father believed in teaching self-sufficiency. Said if I was going to run this ranch someday, I needed to be able to feed myself without relying on anyone else." Marcus refilled her water glass. "After he died, it was just me and Mom, and she's not much for cooking. So I figured it out. What was he like?" "Your father?" Marcus leaned back in his chair, and something in his expression softened. "Tough, fair. He worked harder than any man I've ever known, and he expected the same from me. But he was kind, too. Used to say that how you treat people when they're down tells you everything about who you really are." He met Vera's eyes. "I think about that a lot. About how he'd handle situations, what he'd say. What would he say about your mother?" "About Sunday? He'd say she's scared, that people get mean when they're scared, and the trick is figuring out what they're afraid of." Marcus pushed his empty bowl away. "Mom's afraid of losing control, of not being the most important voice in every room, of being forgotten. Are you afraid of anything?" Vera asked softly. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on something outside the kitchen window. "Yeah, I'm afraid of waking up one day and realizing I've spent my whole life working this ranch and never let myself want anything else. I'm afraid of becoming so comfortable alone that I forget how to be with someone." He turned back to her. "I'm afraid of meeting someone who makes me feel like the world just got bigger, and then losing them because I'm too broken or too stubborn or too much like my mother." The confession hung between them, raw and honest. Vera reached across the table and placed her scarred hand over his scarred knuckles. "I'm afraid of the same things. That the fire took more than just my skin. That I'm too damaged for anyone to love. That I'll spend the rest of my life behind a counter watching other people live while I just exist." Marcus turned his hand over, palm up, and laced his fingers through hers. His hand was enormous, calloused, warm. "You're not damaged, Vera. You're not just existing. You're here. You're trying. That's living. So are you." They sat like that, hands joined across the scarred wooden table, while the light outside shifted from gold to amber to the deep purple of approaching night. Finally, Marcus stood, still holding her hand, and led her through the house to the back porch he'd mentioned. The view stole Vera's breath. The porch overlooked a valley that seemed to stretch into infinity, with mountains rising in the distance like the spine of some sleeping giant. The sky was on fire, oranges and pinks and reds bleeding into deep blue, clouds painted with light. The ranch spread below them, cattle settling for the night. Horses grazing in the far paddock, everything peaceful and complete. "This is what I see every evening," Marcus said, standing close enough that Vera could feel the warmth radiating from him. "This is why I couldn't leave, even when Mom wanted to. This is home. It's incredible." Vera leaned against the porch railing, drinking in the view, feeling the tension of the past week drain away. Out here, the opinions of Crimson Ridge felt distant and unimportant. Out here it was just her and Marcus, and the honest truth of the land. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus said, and there was something vulnerable in his voice that made Vera turn to face him. "Why did you say yes to coming out here? You know the whole town's talking. You know my family's going to make your life harder. Why risk it?" Vera considered the question, searching for words adequate to the feeling in her chest. "Because when you look at me, I don't feel like I need to apologize for existing. Because you make me feel brave. Because for the first time in 8 years, I want to try instead of just surviving." She took a breath. "And because when you walked into that committee meeting, I realized I'd been waiting for someone who wouldn't let the world make me small. You're that someone, Marcus." He closed the distance between them in one long stride, and suddenly they were standing close enough that Vera had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. He raised one hand slowly, giving her time to step away, and cupped her cheek with a gentleness that seemed impossible from someone so large. "I'm going to kiss you now," he said quietly. "If that's not okay, you need to tell me." "It's okay," Vera whispered. "It's more than okay." Marcus leaned down, and when his lips met hers, Vera felt every doubt, every fear, every year of loneliness burn away like morning fog. He kissed her like she was precious, like she was whole, like her scars were just part of the map of who she was, and not the destination. His hand slid from her cheek to the back of her neck, his other arm wrapping around her waist, and Vera let herself sink into the warmth of him, the solidity of him, the rightness of him. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Marcus rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that since Sunday," he admitted. "Maybe even before that. But I didn't want you to think I was like those other men, the ones who treated you like you needed fixing. You're nothing like them." Vera's hands had found their way to his chest, feeling his heart hammering beneath her palms. "They saw my scars and saw damage. You see my scars and see me." "Always you," Marcus said. "Just you." They stood on the porch while the stars emerged one by one, while the temperature dropped and the night sounds of the ranch rose around them. Marcus told her about the history of Broken Creek, about his grandfather, who'd started with nothing and built an empire through sheer stubbornness, about the droughts and the good years and the constant grinding work of keeping a ranch alive. Vera told him about the books she loved, about her dreams of maybe owning the general store outright someday instead of just managing it, about the small pleasures she'd learned to cultivate in her alone years. They talked until Vera was shivering despite Marcus's arm around her shoulders, until the clock in the kitchen chimed 10, and Marcus reluctantly said he should drive her home before she froze. The drive back to Crimson Ridge felt both too long and too short. The cab of the truck a warm cocoon, where Vera's hand found Marcus's on the seat between them and stayed there. He walked her to her apartment door, and when she turned to say goodnight, he kissed her again, slower this time, sweeter, like he was memorizing the taste of her. "Tomorrow's the fundraiser," he said when they broke apart. 6 o'clock set up. "I'll be there. So will I, right beside you on that serving line." He touched her cheek one more time, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. "Thank you for tonight, for saying yes. Thank you for asking." Vera watched him descend the stairs, watched him climb into his truck and drive away into the Montana night. Then she let herself into her apartment and leaned against the closed door, touching her lips where the memory of his kiss still lingered. Her phone buzzed almost immediately. Beth Carson, because of course, Janet Peterson saw Marcus's truck parked outside your place for 4 hours. 4 hours, details, now. Vera smiled and typed back, "No details. But I'm happy." "Really happy? Good, you deserve it. See you at the fundraiser tomorrow. And Vera, don't let them take this away from you." Vera set down her phone and moved to the window, looking out at Crimson Ridge, sleeping under its blanket of stars. Somewhere out there, Marcus was probably just pulling into the ranch, probably thinking about her the way she was thinking about him. Tomorrow, they'd face the town together. Tomorrow, Pauline and Rachel and Dorothy and everyone else who'd spent years deciding Vera wasn't enough would see them side by side, serving hamburgers and defying expectations. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, she felt something that had been missing for so long she'd almost forgotten what it felt like. Hope. Vera touched her scarred forearms, tracing the familiar ridges and valleys. These scars had defined her for 8 years, had become her identity, whether she wanted them to be or not. But Marcus had given her a new definition: survivor, fighter, someone worth knowing. She went to bed with that thought warming her, with the memory of storm cloud eyes and gentle hands, with the taste of possibility on her lips. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own moments of doubt and confrontation. But tonight Vera Sullivan fell asleep happy, held by the promise of a man who'd looked at her scars and called them beautiful. The last thing she thought before sleep claimed her was that maybe, just maybe, she was falling in love. And for the first time in her life, that didn't feel like something to fear. It felt like coming home. Saturday morning dawned clear and warm, the kind of perfect spring day that made Crimson Ridge look like a postcard. Vera woke at 5:30, too nervous to sleep, and spent an hour choosing her outfit with the same care she'd once reserved for job interviews. She settled on khaki shorts and a sleeveless white blouse. No compromise, no concessions to other people's comfort. Her scars were on full display, pale and pink against her skin. And if Pauline Brennan didn't like it, Pauline Brennan could look away. She arrived at the church parking lot at 5:45 to find the setup already underway. Long folding tables lined the perimeter waiting for food. A bounce house was being inflated in the corner, its rainbow colors garish in the early light. Someone had strung lights between the trees, and Stuart Hammond was directing traffic with his clipboard like a general commanding troops. Marcus's truck was already there, parked near the serving area. Vera spotted him immediately, impossible to miss even in a crowd, hauling bags of charcoal toward the massive grills that were being fired up. He was wearing jeans and a grey t-shirt that stretched across his shoulders, and when he caught sight of Vera, his entire face transformed. He set down the charcoal and crossed the parking lot in long strides, and before Vera could second-guess herself, she walked straight into his arms. He lifted her off the ground in a hug that felt like coming home, her feet dangling, his face buried in her hair. "Morning," he said when he set her down, and his smile was worth every whisper, every stare, every moment of doubt that had led to this. "Morning yourself." Vera's hands lingered on his forearms, feeling the familiar texture of work-worn skin. "You're here early. I wanted to make sure everything was set up right, and wanted to be here before my mother arrived." His expression darkened slightly. "Fair warning, she's not happy about today. Rachel called me last night, tried one more time to get me to back out. And I told her I'd see her at the fundraiser serving food next to you." He tucked a strand of hair behind Vera's ear, the gesture so tender it made her chest ache. "You ready for this?" "No, but I'm doing it anyway. That's my girl." The possessive pronoun sent warmth flooding through Vera's body. My girl, like she belonged to him with him, like they were already something more than whatever careful definition they'd been dancing around all week. Reverend Walsh appeared, looking harried but pleased. "Marcus, Vera, wonderful. We need people on the serving line starting at noon. Can you both handle the main course station? Burgers and hot dogs?" "Absolutely," Marcus said, before Pauline could materialize and object. They spent the morning setting up, arranging condiments, stacking plates, filling coolers with ice and drinks. The volunteers arrived in waves. Beth Carson with her famous potato salad, Travis Coleman's crew hauling in the rented tables and chairs, Joyce Hampton setting up her biscuit station with military precision. The Martinez twins raced through the parking lot, already hyped up on sugar despite the early hour, while their mother chased them with threats that held no conviction. At 11:45, Pauline and Rachel arrived in Pauline's pristine Cadillac. They emerged like ice queens, both wearing designer sundresses and expressions of practiced disdain. Pauline's gaze swept the parking lot, landed on Marcus and Vera, standing together at the grill station, and her lips compressed into a thin line. She made her way over with Rachel trailing behind, and Vera felt Marcus shift slightly, positioning himself between her and his mother like a shield. "Marcus!" Pauline's voice could have frozen fire. "Rachel tells me you're insisting on working the food line." "That's right." Marcus's tone was pleasant, but Vera could feel the steel underneath. "Vera and I are handling the main course station." "How quaint." Pauline's eyes slid to Vera, raking over her exposed arms with undisguised contempt. "I suppose we'll just have to hope people's appetites aren't affected by unfortunate visuals." "Mother," Marcus's voice dropped to something dangerous. "I'm going to say this once. You can either be civil or you can leave. Those are your only two options. Don't you dare speak to me that way. I'm your mother, and you're acting like a bully." Marcus didn't raise his voice, but people were starting to turn, starting to notice the confrontation brewing. "I love you, but I will not stand here and let you insult Vera. Not today." "Not ever." Pauline's face flushed red. Rachel grabbed her arm, whispering urgently, but Pauline shook her off. "This is what you're choosing? This damaged woman over your own family?" The words hung in the air like poison. Vera felt every eye in the parking lot turn toward them, felt the weight of the town's judgment pressing down. She wanted to shrink, to hide, to run back to her apartment and lock the door and never come out. But Marcus's hand found hers, warm and solid and grounding. "I'm choosing decency," Marcus said quietly. "I'm choosing kindness. I'm choosing someone who's been through hell and came out stronger. If you can't see Vera's worth, that says everything about you and nothing about her." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried across the parking lot. "And yeah, I'm choosing her over anyone who thinks cruelty is acceptable just because it's wrapped in politeness." Silence fell like a curtain. Pauline stood frozen, shock and fury warring on her face. Rachel had gone pale, staring at her brother like she'd never seen him before. Reverend Walsh was hurrying over, clearly ready to mediate, but before he could arrive, something unexpected happened. Beth Carson started clapping. It was slow at first, deliberate, each clap echoing in the quiet. Then Linda Hammond joined in, then Travis Coleman, then Joyce Hampton. Within seconds, half the parking lot was applauding, and Pauline Brennan stood in the center of it all, watching her social power crumble in real time. She turned on her heel and stalked back to her Cadillac, Rachel scrambling after her. They drove away in a spray of gravel, and the applause faded into uncomfortable murmurs and nervous laughter. Marcus let out a long breath, his shoulders dropping. "Well, that happened. That happened," Vera repeated, her voice shaky. She looked up at him, this giant of a man who'd just chosen her in front of everyone, and felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you doesn't seem like enough. You don't need to thank me for telling the truth." He squeezed her hand. "Come on, we've got burgers to serve." The fundraiser officially opened at noon, and within minutes, the parking lot was packed with families, teenagers, elderly couples who came for the food and stayed for the gossip. The bounce house filled with shrieking children. The volunteer band, 4 guys from the gas station who'd been playing together since high school, set up on the makeshift stage and launched into an enthusiastic, if slightly off-key, rendition of Sweet Home Alabama. At the main course station, Marcus and Vera fell into an easy rhythm. He handled the grill, flipping burgers and hot dogs with the efficiency of someone who'd cooked for ranch hands 1,000 times. Vera assembled plates, added sides, took money and made change, all while keeping up a steady stream of small talk with the people who filed through. Some people stared at her arms. Of course they did. But something had shifted after Marcus's public declaration. The stares felt different now, less judgment, more curiosity. And when Dorothy Chen came through the line, her eyes flickering from Vera's scars to Marcus's protective proximity, she smiled tightly and said, "You two make a good team." It wasn't an apology, but it was something. The afternoon wore on, hot and busy and surprisingly joyful. Marcus kept sneaking glances at Vera between burger flips, and every time their eyes met, Vera felt that same swooping sensation in her stomach. They worked side by side, occasionally brushing shoulders, occasionally sharing private smiles, and Vera realized this was what partnership looked like, not grand gestures, but showing up and doing the work together. Around 3 o'clock, during a brief lull in the line, Marcus leaned close and murmured, "You doing okay? Need a break?" "I'm perfect," Vera said, and meant it. Despite the heat, despite the lingering whispers, despite knowing that Pauline was probably at home right now, calling every person she knew to complain about her ungrateful son, Vera felt more at peace than she had in years. Good. Marcus's hand found the small of her back, just for a moment, just long enough to ground her. "Because I plan on keeping you out here as long as possible. Selfish, I know, but I like having you next to me." "Not selfish," Vera said softly. "I like it too." The Martinez twins appeared, dragging their exhausted mother behind them. "Miss Sullivan, Mr. Brennan, can we have extra pickles?" "You can have whatever you want," Marcus said, loading their plates with enough food to feed a small army. The twins beamed at him like he was a superhero, and their mother mouthed, "Thank you," before being dragged toward the drink station. As the afternoon stretched toward evening, Vera noticed people lingering near their station longer than necessary. Beth Carson came back for a second burger just to tell Vera she'd been magnificent standing up there. Travis Coleman brought his whole crew through the line twice, making a point to shake Marcus's hand and tell him, "Good job, man." Even Reverend Walsh stopped by to say that today's turnout was the best they'd had in years, and he suspected it had something to do with the entertainment value of watching Marcus Brennan finally stand up to his mother. By the time they shut down the grill at 6 o'clock, Vera's feet ached, her face hurt from smiling, and she'd never been happier. They worked together, breaking down the station, packing away leftover supplies, cleaning the grills while the last stragglers finished their meals and the band packed up their equipment. Stuart Hammond approached as they were wiping down the serving tables, his clipboard clutched to his chest. "Marcus, Vera, I wanted to say, that is, Linda and I wanted to say, what you did today was—" He struggled for words, his usually corporate demeanor cracking. "It was right. It needed to happen. Pauline's been running roughshod over this town for too long, and it took someone with your courage to say enough." "Wasn't courage," Marcus said, but Stuart shook his head. "It was. Courage looks like a lot of things, but standing up to family when they're wrong, that's the hardest kind." He extended his hand, first to Marcus, then to Vera. "You've got our respect, both of you, After Stewart left, Marcus turned to Vera with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You want to get out of here? Go somewhere quiet?" "God, yes," Vera laughed, suddenly aware of how drained she was. "Where did you have in mind?" "Somewhere I go when I need to think. Somewhere that helps me remember why I stay in Montana, even when people make it hard." He offered his hand. "Trust me?" "Always," Vera said, and took it. They drove north out of Crimson Ridge as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Marcus turned off Highway 12 onto a dirt road Vera had never noticed, winding up into the foothills where the grassland gave way to stands of pine and aspen. They drove for 20 minutes in comfortable silence, country music playing softly on the radio, Marcus's hand wrapped around hers on the seat between them. Finally, he pulled off onto a barely visible trail and parked in a small clearing. "We walk from here. It's not far." He led her through the trees, his hand guiding her over roots and rocks, until they emerged onto an outcropping that overlooked the valley below. Vera gasped. Crimson Ridge was laid out like a toy town in the distance, the setting sun turning everything golden. Mountains rose on all sides, their peaks still touched with snow. The sky was impossibly vast, stretching from horizon to horizon in a canvas of changing light. "This is my place," Marcus said quietly. "Been coming here since I was 16, since right after Dad died. When everything gets too loud, when I forget what matters, I come here and remember how small all the noise is compared to this." Vera stood at the edge of the outcropping, drinking in the view, feeling the day's tension finally release from her shoulders. "It's perfect. You're perfect." Marcus moved behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist, his chin resting on top of her head. "You know that, right? The way you handled today, the grace you showed even when people were staring, the strength it took to keep smiling, you're extraordinary." "Vera Sullivan," Vera leaned back against his chest, feeling the steady thump of his heart against her spine. "I had help. You stood there with me the whole time, because there's nowhere else I want to be." He turned her in his arms, and the look in his storm-cloud eyes made Vera's breath catch. "I know it's fast. I know we've only really known each other for a week, but I need you to understand something. This isn't a pity. This isn't a rescue fantasy. This is me being selfish because when I'm with you, I feel like I'm finally living instead of just working." "Marcus, let me finish." His hands cupped her face, thumbs brushing her cheekbones. "You make me want things I thought I'd given up on. A partner, someone to share sunsets with, someone who sees me, not the rancher or Pauline Brennan's difficult son or the guy who's too quiet at town meetings. Just me, and I see you the same way. Not your scars, not your past, not what other people decided you should be. Just you, Vera, and you're everything." Vera felt tears slip down her cheeks, felt Marcus brush them away with infinite gentleness. "I'm falling in love with you," she whispered, "and it terrifies me." "I'm already there," Marcus said. "Already in love with you? Has been since you opened your apartment door in that coffee-stained t-shirt and looked at me like I was worth listening to. Maybe even before that." He pressed his forehead to hers. "And yeah, it's terrifying, but it's also the best thing that's ever happened to me." Vera rose on her toes and kissed him as the sun painted the sky crimson and gold, as the mountains held their breath, as everything else in the world fell away until there was only this, only them, only truth, only the overwhelming rightness of two scarred people choosing each other against all odds. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Marcus smiled. "So what happens now?" Vera looked at her arms in the fading light, at the scars that had defined her for so long. Then she looked at Marcus, at the man who'd called those scars beautiful and meant it. "Now we live," she said. "We face down whatever comes next. Together." "Together," Marcus agreed, and kissed her again as the stars began to emerge, as Crimson Ridge settled into the evening below them, as everything they'd survived led them exactly here, to each other, to hope, to home. 3 months had passed since the fundraiser, and Crimson Ridge had reluctantly adjusted to the reality of Marcus Brennan and Vera Sullivan, They were seen everywhere together, at Ruby's diner sharing coffee and conversation, at the hardware store picking out paint for the general store's long-overdue renovation, driving out to the ranch on Friday evenings when Vera closed up shop. The town's initial shock had mellowed into grudging acceptance, then something approaching approval when people realized this wasn't a fleeting thing or a phase Marcus would grow out of. Pauline Brennan had not attended family dinner in 3 months. Rachel had stopped speaking to her brother entirely. But the rest of Crimson Ridge, slowly, incrementally, in the way that small towns moved when they finally decided to catch up with progress, had opened their arms to the unlikely couple. Now, it was a Thursday in late June, and Vera stood in the small room behind the Presbyterian church's sanctuary, staring at herself in a full-length mirror that had seen 40 years of brides prepare for their walk down the aisle. The dress was simple, ivory lace with a sweetheart neckline and a flowing skirt that ended just below her knees. No train, no veil, nothing fussy or complicated. But the sleeves were what mattered, or rather, the lack of them. The dress was sleeveless, leaving her scarred arms completely exposed from shoulder to wrist. Beth Carson, serving as maid of honor despite Vera's protests that she didn't need one, stood behind her, adjusting the small wreath of wildflowers in Vera's hair. "You look absolutely stunning," Beth said, her voice thick with emotion. "Marcus is going to lose his mind when he sees you." "I'm terrified," Vera admitted, smoothing her hands over the dress. Outside the small room, she could hear the church filling with people, friends, customers, half the town coming to witness the wedding that 6 months ago nobody would have believed possible. Of Marcus, of walking down that aisle with everyone staring at my arms, of giving them all one more chance to decide I'm not good enough. Vera met Beth's eyes in the mirror. "The town dentist told me I should keep them covered on my wedding day. Said no man would want to see burn scars walking down the aisle." Beth's face hardened. "Dr. Morrison is a judgmental old fool who's been divorced 3 times. His opinion is worth less than nothing." She squeezed Vera's shoulders. "Besides, Marcus already told you what he thinks about your scars. Remember?" Vera did remember. It had been 2 weeks ago, lying in Marcus's bed at the ranch after a dinner that had ended with them tangled in his sheets, breathless and laughing. Marcus had traced every line of scar tissue on her arms with his fingertips, then his lips murmuring against her skin. "These are part of your story. Our story now. I wouldn't change a single one." A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Vera, you decent?" Ray Coleman's gruff voice called through the wood. "Come in, Ray." Ray entered, looking uncomfortable, in a suit that was slightly too small across his broad mechanic's shoulders. He'd agreed to walk Vera down the aisle after her own father had declined to make the trip from Great Falls, a wound that still stung, but one Vera was learning to live with. Ray had fixed Marcus's truck 100 times over the years, had watched the rancher grow from a grieving teenager into the man he was now. And when Marcus had asked him to give Vera away, Ray had actually teared up. "Well now," Ray said, his voice rough with emotion, "ain't you a sight? Marcus is pacing out there like a caged animal. I think he's worried you're gonna change your mind." "Never," Vera said firmly. "Is everyone here?" "Near about. Reverend Walsh is ready whenever you are." Ray offered his arm, and Vera took it, feeling the tremble in her own hands. "For what it's worth, I've known Marcus Brennan since he was knee-high to a grasshopper. Never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. That boy is head over heels." "He's not a boy anymore," Vera said with a slight smile. "No, ma'am, he surely ain't. He's a man who knows exactly what he wants, and he wants you." Ray patted her hand. "Now let's get you married before he wears a hole in the church floor." The music started, a simple guitar melody played by one of Travis Coleman's crew who moonlighted in a bluegrass band. Beth gave Vera one final hug, then slipped out to take her place at the altar. The door to the sanctuary opened, and Vera caught her first glimpse of the crowd. The pews were packed. Stuart and Linda Hammond in the 3rd row. Dorothy Chen, who'd actually apologized to Vera 2 months ago after her own daughter called her out for being cruel, sitting beside Ruby Martinez. Travis and his entire construction crew taking up the back row, looking solemn in their Sunday best. Gerald Morrison, who still complained about the weather every morning, but had started adding, "Have a good day" at the end. Joyce Hampton dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, and then, at the end of the aisle, standing beside Reverend Walsh, Marcus. He wore a dark suit that had been tailored to fit his massive frame, a bolo tie with a turquoise stone, and boots so polished they caught the light streaming through the stained glass windows. His hair had been freshly cut, his beard trimmed neat. But it was his face that stopped Vera's heart. The raw emotion written across it, the way his eyes went wide when he saw her, the way his hand came up to press against his chest, like he needed to physically hold himself together. Ray felt her hesitate and murmured, "That's love, darling. The real kind. Don't run from it." Vera took a deep breath and started walking. Every step down that aisle felt like shedding an old skin. She could feel eyes on her arms, could see heads turning, could almost hear the whispers. But she kept her chin up and her eyes locked on Marcus, who looked like he might weep or shout or fall to his knees, some combination of all three. When she reached the altar, Ray placed her hand in Marcus's with a gruff, "Take care of her, son," and stepped back. Marcus's fingers closed around hers, warm and strong and trembling slightly. "Hi," he whispered, his voice for her alone. "Hi yourself," Vera whispered back. Reverend Walsh cleared his throat, smiling at them with genuine warmth. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Marcus James Brennan and Vera Ann Sullivan in holy matrimony. And I have to say, in my 30 years of performing weddings, I've never been more certain that two people were absolutely meant for each other." A ripple of laughter moved through the congregation. Marcus's grip on Vera's hands tightened, and she saw him blink rapidly, fighting tears. Reverend Walsh continued through the traditional opening, talking about love and commitment and partnership. Then he paused, looking at the couple before him. "Marcus and Vera have chosen to write their own vows. Marcus, would you like to begin?" Marcus nodded, swallowing hard. He'd been practicing these vows for weeks, scribbling them on the backs of feed store receipts, running them past the horses in his barn, memorizing every word. Now, standing before Vera with the entire town watching, he spoke from his heart. "Vera, when I first saw you 4 years ago behind that counter in the general store, I thought you were the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. But I was too scared to talk to you, too convinced that someone like you would never look twice at someone like me. Too quiet, too awkward, too much my mother's son." He paused, and someone in the congregation laughed softly. "Then I heard my mother being cruel to you, and I realized I had a choice. I could stay quiet and let it happen, or I could stand up. You made me brave, Vera. You made me want to be better than my fear." Tears were streaming down Vera's face now, but she didn't let go of his hands. "People told me I was making a mistake," Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger. "They said I was too quick, too reckless, that I didn't know you well enough. But they were wrong. I know your heart. I know your strength. I know the way you take your coffee and the books you read when you think nobody's watching, and the exact tone of voice you use when Gerald Morrison complains about the weather. I know that you survived something that would have broken most people, and you came out of it with kindness still intact. That's not weakness, that's steel wrapped in grace." He lifted her scarred hands to his lips and kissed each one, first the left, then the right, his mouth gentle against the twisted tissue. The gesture was so tender, so public, so deliberately chosen that several people in the congregation openly sobbed. "I promise to stand with you every day for the rest of my life," Marcus said. "To choose you over comfort, over fear, over anyone who says we don't fit. I promise to see you, not your past, not your scars, just you. And I promise to love you so well that you never doubt your worth again. You are everything, Vera Sullivan, and I am the luckiest man alive that you're about to become Vera Brennan." The church was silent, except for the sound of sniffling. Even Reverend Walsh looked suspiciously misty-eyed. Vera took a shaky breath, trying to compose herself enough to speak her own vows. "Marcus," she began, her voice wavering. 8 years ago, I survived a fire that took my skin but left me alive. For a long time, I thought that was the worst thing that could happen, living, but being too damaged for anyone to love. I hid from the world. I built walls. I convinced myself that being alone was safer than risking rejection. She looked up at him, at his storm cloud eyes shining with unshed tears, and found her strength. Then you walked up my stairs with a hat in your hands and an apology that wasn't yours to give. You looked at my arms and saw strength instead of shame. You stood up to your own family for me. You made me feel brave enough to stop hiding. Vera's voice broke, but she pushed through. You taught me that scars don't make us broken. They make us warriors. That survival isn't just about living through something terrible. It's about choosing to keep living after, to keep hoping, to keep believing that good things can still happen. She squeezed his hands, feeling the calluses that matched her own in different ways. I promise to be your partner in everything, Vera said, to work beside you at the ranch, to support your dreams, to tell you when you're wrong and celebrate when you're right. I promise to never take for granted what we have, this rare, precious thing that most people spend their whole lives searching for. I promise to love you with all my scarred, surviving, stubbornly hopeful heart. You saw me when I was invisible, Marcus Brennan, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure you know how extraordinary that is. Marcus let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and reached up to wipe tears from his eyes. Behind them, Beth was crying openly into a tissue. Ray Coleman's shoulders were shaking. Even Stuart Hammond looked suspiciously emotional. Reverend Walsh had to clear his throat 3 times before he could continue. The rings, please. Ray stepped forward with the simple gold bands they'd chosen. No diamonds, no flourishes, just solid circles that would withstand ranch work and general store labor and everything else life threw at them. Marcus slid Vera's ring onto her finger with hands that shook, and she did the same for him, both of them laughing through their tears. By the power vested in me by the state of Montana and the Presbyterian Church, Reverend Walsh said, his voice ringing through the sanctuary, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Marcus, you may kiss your bride. Marcus didn't need to be told twice. He cupped Vera's face in his enormous hands and kissed her like she was oxygen, and he'd been drowning, deep and sweet and full of promise. The congregation erupted in applause and cheers, and when they finally broke apart, both breathless, Marcus lifted Vera clean off her feet and spun her in a circle, her dress flaring around them, her laughter echoing off the church rafters. Ladies and gentlemen, Reverend Walsh announced with evident satisfaction, I present to you Mr. and Mrs. Marcus Brennan. They walked back down the aisle hand in hand, past rows of smiling faces and dabbing eyes, past Dorothy Chen, who actually reached out to squeeze Vera's arm as she passed, past Gerald Morrison, who nodded approval. At the door, they stepped out into brilliant June sunshine, and the crowd followed, throwing rice and wildflower petals, shouting congratulations. Marcus's ancient pickup truck was parked at the curb, decorated with tin cans and white streamers and a hand-painted sign that read, Just Married. But before they could escape to the reception at Ruby's Diner, a sleek Cadillac pulled up to the church. The crowd went silent. Vera felt Marcus tense beside her. Pauline Brennan emerged from the driver's seat, dressed in understated elegance, her expression unreadable. Rachel climbed out from the passenger side, looking nervous. For a long moment, mother and son stared at each other across the church lawn, while the entire town held its breath. Then Pauline walked forward, stopping a few feet from where Marcus and Vera stood. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her usual composure cracked at the edges. I wasn't going to come, Pauline said quietly. Told myself you'd made your choice, and it wasn't my place anymore. But Rachel convinced me that being right was less important than being present. She looked at Vera, really looked at her, and something in her expression shifted. I was cruel to you. I judged you for things that had nothing to do with your character and everything to do with my own fears. I'm sorry, Vera. You didn't deserve that." The apology hung in the air, imperfect but real. Vera felt Marcus's hand tighten around hers, felt him waiting to follow her lead. "Thank you," Vera said carefully. "That couldn't have been easy to say." "It wasn't. But my son loves you, and I've lost too much time being stubborn." "Elo." Pauline turned to Marcus, and her voice cracked. "I'm sorry I made you choose. I'm sorry I wasn't the mother you deserved in this. I'm proud of you, Marcus. Your father would be too." Marcus made a sound deep in his chest and pulled his mother into a hug that lifted her off her feet, just like he'd done to Vera. Pauline clung to him, and when they separated, both were crying. Rachel joined them, and suddenly it was a family embrace, messy and imperfect, but undeniably real. "The reception's at Ruby's," Marcus said when they finally broke apart. "If you wanted to come." "Both of you?" Pauline nodded, wiping her eyes. "We'd like that, if Vera's comfortable with it." Everyone looked at Vera. She thought about the past 6 months, about the journey from that first cruel conversation in the general store to this moment on the church lawn. She thought about the scars on her arms and the scars everyone carried inside, and how healing required risk. "Come to the reception," Vera said. "Let's start over." The relief on Pauline's face was profound. She nodded, unable to speak, and retreated to her Cadillac with Rachel. The crowd began moving toward Ruby's, chattering about the unexpected reconciliation, about Marcus's vows, about how Vera's dress had been absolutely perfect. Marcus pulled Vera close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You didn't have to do that. After everything she put you through. She's your mother, and maybe people can change if you give them a reason to." Vera looked up at her husband, and smiled. "Besides, I'm too happy right now to hold grudges. I just married the love of my life in front of half of Montana. Everything else is just details. The love of your life, huh?" Marcus grinned, that rare full smile that transformed his entire face. "Don't let it go to your head, Brennan. Too late, Mrs. Brennan. Way too late." They climbed into the decorated truck and drove the 3 blocks to Ruby's, where the diner had been transformed with white tablecloths and more wildflowers and a cake that Ruby had spent 3 days perfecting. The reception was loud and joyful, full of toasts and terrible dancing, and Gerald Morrison actually smiling when Vera and Marcus cut the cake together, his massive hand over hers on the knife. As the sun set and the party moved outside onto Main Street, because Ruby's wasn't big enough to contain everyone, Marcus pulled Vera aside to a quiet corner. The streetlights were just coming on, casting everything in warm, golden light. "I have something for you," he said, pulling a small wrapped box from his jacket pocket. "Was going to wait until we got home, but I can't hold on to it anymore." Vera unwrapped it carefully to find a delicate silver bracelet, but as she examined it closer, she realized it wasn't just any bracelet. It was custom-made. The silver worked to look like the ridges and valleys of scarred skin, beautiful and deliberate. "The jeweler in Billings made it," Marcus explained, watching her face. "I wanted you to have something that celebrated every part of you, your strength, your survival, your story." Vera couldn't speak. She held out her wrist, and Marcus fastened the bracelet over her scars, the silver catching the light. It was the most beautiful piece of jewelry she'd ever seen, and it sat on her damaged skin like it belonged there. Because it did. Because all of her belonged here, belonged with him. "I love you," she whispered. "So much it scares me sometimes." "Good scared or bad scared?" "The best kind of scared. The kind that means I have something worth protecting." She pulled him down for a kiss, tasting cake frosting and champagne and the future stretching out before them. "Take me home, husband. To our home." They said their goodbyes, hugged what felt like every person in Crimson Ridge, and finally escaped in the truck. The drive to Broken Creek Ranch, their ranch now, wrote their names on the deed as of last week. took 30 minutes through Montana darkness, stars emerging like diamonds scattered across black velvet. When they pulled up to the house, Marcus carried Vera over the threshold despite her protests, both of them laughing. The house that had felt so empty for so many years was now full of Vera's presence. Her books on the shelves, her coffee mugs in the kitchen, her clothes mixed with his in the closet. They'd spent the last month making it theirs together, painting walls and rearranging furniture and building a life. They made love slowly, tenderly, Marcus worshipping every inch of her skin, scarred and smooth alike, until Vera forgot where she ended and he began. Afterward, they lay tangled in sheets, the windows open to let in the cool night air, the sound of crickets and distant cattle drifting in. "You know what I realized today?" Vera said, tracing patterns on Marcus's chest. "I spent 8 years thinking my scars had ruined my chance at happiness. But if the fire hadn't happened, I never would have moved to Crimson Ridge, never would have bought the general store, never would have been there the day you walked in. So you're saying getting burned was a good thing?" Marcus's voice was carefully neutral. "No, it was a terrible thing that I wouldn't wish on anyone." Vera propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him in the moonlight streaming through the window. "But it led me here. To you, to this. And I wouldn't trade this for anything, not even perfect skin." Marcus pulled her down for a kiss that tasted like forever. "I wouldn't trade you for anything either, perfect or scarred or anything in between. You're mine, Vera Brennan, and I'm yours. That's the only truth that matters." They fell asleep wrapped around each other, two people who'd survived different fires and found each other on the other side. Outside, the Montana night stretched endless and star-studded over Broken Creek Ranch. The cattle settled. The horses drowsed in their stalls. The land breathed its ancient rhythms. And in the ranch house that had stood for 4 generations, Marcus and Vera Brennan began the first night of the rest of their lives, 2 survivors who'd learned that scars don't define you, love does. That family is who shows up, not who you're born to. That the greatest courage is letting someone see all your broken places and trusting them not to look away. They'd both been told no one would want them, him too quiet, her too damaged. They'd both been told to settle, to hide, to accept less than they deserved. They'd both been told wrong. And on this perfect June night, wrapped in each other's arms, with the whole future stretching before them like an open road, they knew with absolute certainty that their story, the one that started with cruelty and grew into courage, that bloomed from loneliness into love, was just beginning. Some stories end happily ever after. This one began there. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.